Hey y'all, how's it going? So in this one, I was just playing with the Docker and Compose file, going back and forth between that and the make file, and I noticed a bug here that I'll show you. So I already started the compose, right? I'll do that again just to show you. So Docker compose up, cancel out of that, and then if we do something like make backend, it says failed to remove a file. So that prompted me to just kind of look at like how we're setting up Docker and some optimizations that we can make. So I wanted to sort of go through that in this one. So the reason it's happening is because this volume section here, which is under the backend service, is this is a bind mount right here, which means that we're basically saying that everything going from backend will go to app on the container, and likewise back and forth. They'll just communicate back and forth. So then if we come over to the Docker file, we have a UV sync up here. So what it's doing is that's creating a new virtual environment. Because the container's creating it, we as root, we don't have permission to edit it when it comes back to the backend, and we're just using the normal make command. So what we'll do to solve that is we'll use something called the named volume. What a named volume is going to do is it's going to make it so the virtual environment, which is what's causing the error here, is only going to be written to Docker's internal storage, and it won't be written back to the backend folder. That way when we're using the make command, we'll be just using our own virtual environment rather than the one shared with Docker. What I found confusing about this when I first looked it up was that the YAML command is still called volume. The difference is that it's on the same level as services right here. So to be, whoops, so to be shared by the entire compose. So like that. Then we have that, and so we have a virtual environment directory for both the front end and the back end. Now let me grab the commands. Alright, so we have the front end directory pointing to wherever the virtual environment gets created. And then we'll do the same for the back end here. So we're still going to want to remove this virtual environment from the backend. So I've got a sudo remove command here. The difference is that this will just be a one-time cost. We won't have to do this every single time, which I'll show you. So now if we do make backend, it'll install everything, run it, great. Now if we do Docker compose up, okay, it'll just reinstall everything, great. And now if we do make backend again, then it still works. Okay, so that's one bug out of the way. Okay, so for the next part, this isn't incredibly necessary, but see how we have the virtual environment, the PyTest cache, and the PyCache here? We don't, the Docker file is, it's just copy dot to dot, right? So it's just copy everything in general. We don't need to copy everything, right? So just like we have a dot get ignore file, we can make a dot docker ignore file, and what that's going to do is so that whenever the Docker container is created, it's going to look at that ignore file and say, hey, we don't need this stuff. So I've just put in the virtual environment, the bytecode files that are made with PyCache and the PyTest cache. So I can just do that, and I can do that for both the front end and the back end folder. And so this is more just like a good practice kind of a thing. This isn't going to solve any bugs or anything. So if you start both the front end and the back end just using the make files, you'll notice that you get an error here. And the reason for that, you don't get that when you're using Docker normally, but the reason you get that here is because it says fail to resolve backend. And that's because backend is an address that it exists with Docker. It doesn't exist when we're just hosting it on our normal machine. So if we go to, I believe it's in plot.py. Here it is. See, it's going to the backend address here. So if we just typed in like 127.0.0.1, then it would work. What I want to do, however, is I want to be able to control this with a variable so that we can seamlessly go back and forth between Docker and just using the makefile. So what we can do for that is we can use Docker environmental variables. Under the front end service, there's another YAML that you can specify called environment. And so that will actually have any variables that you want to pass. So what we can do with that then is that we can define that in our constants file. We can go out and get that backend URL variable, and then we can be able to use that. So the backend URL just references, we have to import OS here. Import OS, that works. Okay, and the backend URL is referencing whatever's in the environment, and it tries to get a variable called the backend URL. If it doesn't find that, then it uses this 127 address. So when we're starting Docker, we will have this defined. When we're using the makefile, we won't have this defined. Therefore, it'll default to just using the 127 address. So the only thing we have to do now to tie that together is go back to plot.py. We'll make this an F string. And then, yep, okay, good job. Now we just restart this backend service. Or front end service. Refresh it. And we're all set. Something else that we can do to optimize things is, so this is from the Docker docs here. I can zoom in a little bit. So the way that you order your layers matters because basically, when Docker detects a change on one of these steps, it invalidates that it has to run that step again, and then every step that follows it. So this example looks kind of sort of similar to the setup that we're doing, and Docker is calling this inefficient. Instead, what they're doing is they're copying. This is a package.json and yarn.lock, which is, those are different than what we have, but the same idea. They're kind of manifest files. So they bring those in, then they can run the actual npm install. In our case, npm install would just be uv sync. And then they copy everything after that. With that idea, what we're going to do is we're going to move this copy everything command down to here. Take that command, put it up there, take copy just the py project and the uv lock file. And then these bind mounts here for the uv lock and pyproject.toml, we don't need that anymore. This cache mount is also in the Docker docs, and it basically just keeps everything in here persisting through reboots to make it faster. So unless we specifically invalidate the cache, it will just kind of keep it to speed things up. We'll also update the front end Docker file to do about the same thing. So we'll just have it on my clipboard here. go to up here, and then we can see what ended up changing between this if I open changes with previous revision. So we're adding cache rounds up here for the aptitude cache. So then, similar to what we did with the backend, we are copying the Pi project and uv.lock. So those are the manifest files. So we're copying those in first, and then so we're removing the bind mount for the Pi project and uv.lock since we don't need that anymore. So then we run uvsync, and then we copy everything else. And again, this is because as long as the dependencies haven't changed, we don't have to redo these steps when we actually build. Alright, so I've canceled out of both the backend and the front end terminal processes. Now what I want to do to test this is I don't want to do just Docker compose up because that might have some build cache or something, so I just want to do a -s build with it, and for good measure let's do -s force -recreate just to make sure that we have nothing. Alright, so there we go. Let's refresh, and it's all set. Okay, great. So those are just a few quick improvements that you can do to the Docker build process. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.